Hello Tower Gaming players, this is Evan Jarvis, also known as Gripst, and welcome to part 3 of my multi-table tournament guide. In this section I will look at how to approach the middle stages of a tournament. Once you've developed a good idea of how your opponents play and the antes kick in, it's time to start building a big stack for use later in the tournament. The middle stages are when we should be most willing to gamble, with the hopes of accumulating a lot of chips. It's much easier to navigate through a large field of players if you have a big stack to help you out. So, let's look at how you can pile up those chips and become the bully. The first thing you'll want to do, as always in poker, is read the table. You want to be paying attention to how people are adjusting once the antes have kicked in. Are they opening a lot of pots and aggressively going after the blinds? Are they being relatively quiet and most likely waiting for premium hands? Do they like to defend their blinds when no one else has called? Or are they playing back at people with a lot of re-raising? All this information is vital to knowing what plays you should be using against which opponents. There is always a way to get chips from a player, no matter what his style, but the best methods differ from player to player. Also, be on the lookout for donks and fish, as they will still be in the mix. There's nothing sweeter than getting moved to a table where a very weak player has a huge stack and getting an early Christmas gift. Pay attention to how your opponents are playing, take notes, and pay very close attention whenever there's a showdown. You can infer a lot about someone's game based on the cards they show down, so make sure you're watching when the cards are turned over. Once you've developed an idea of how everyone is playing, it's time to start taking advantage of their tendencies. If a player who you notice has been playing relatively few hands opens a pot, you shouldn't be looking for a big confrontation with them. Even if you hold a hand like ace-queen or pocket jacks, often the correct play is simply to fold and wait for a better spot. You don't lose any chips by folding, and if you are looking at what's most likely an unprofitable opportunity, it's not like you're losing value by folding a good-looking hand. When the tight players open, you should only be re-raising hands that are well ahead of their range or calling to crack their big hand, assuming you have enough chips behind. The implied odds rule still holds in the middle stages that you want about 20 times their open and stack left to play if you're going to make a speculative call. If you notice someone is opening a lot of pots, then you want to look for good spots to re-raise them. A good spot for a re-raise includes two of the following elements. 1. The player has shown that he is opening a lot of hands, more than 15% at a full table. And 2. It's a good spot to steal, meaning the villain is opening in late position and the players in the blinds have not shown that they are defenders. Since your opponents who are opening a lot of pots aren't going to have premium hands very often, they'll have no choice but to fold when you re-raise them, as long as your timing's spot on. This is a very profitable play that will allow you to pick up 4 to 5 big blinds without showdown. That's an extra 2 rounds of hands to pick up a real holding. When you are playing back at the loose guys, your cards aren't that important, since you're bluffing. Look for good spots to re-raise them, and with experience you will become very good at identifying easy spots to add chips to your stack. While it's important to play back at the loose guys, since they rarely have the goods to fight back, we have to be careful about who we go after. There are some strong players who will be aware that you are trying to re-steal from them. These players are capable of coming back over the top of you with any 2 cards if you raise them, knowing full well that you probably don't have much of a hand either. Against these players, you only want to be re-raising them if you are comfortable going all in when they re-raise you. Against these players, however, a good hand for going all in is more than just ace-king and big pairs. Since these guys will be moving in with any ace and sometimes any pair hands, like ace-jack suited, become great candidates to re-raise for value and call off if they shove on you. But without any sort of real holding, where you're comfortable getting it in, the best plan is simply to avoid these players and find easier spots to pick up chips. There's plenty of dead money floating around, and it's not your job to be policing everyone at every opportunity. At first, you'll probably wonder how we can know which players are likely to fold to our re-raises and who is likely to come over the top with a 4-bet. To know this, you simply have to go back to point 1 and pay attention. Chances are you won't be the only player doing re-raising, so you should watch how players are reacting when they get 3-bet. The easiest way to pick up chips and grow your stack in a tournament is to steal from the tight players. These players are looking to only play premium hands, which means they're going to be folding to opens about 90% of the time. They're looking to survive, and therefore they want to avoid confrontation as much as possible. Against these players, our cards aren't important since we will almost never be making it to showdown, so we're playing the spot more than the cards. You want to be aware of the stack sizes behind you when you're opening for a steal. There's a certain stack size which we will cover in a later lesson that is perfect for re-raising all in over loose openers. You want to be sure these stacks are not still left to act when you open, as it will drastically lower the success rate of your steals. It's also important to know that if a player is just a nit, meaning they will only call with premium hands and fold everything else, or if they are weak tight, meaning they will never re-raise, but they like to defend their blinds with crappy holding sometimes. If someone is a defender, you will want to be stealing with hands that have some post-flop playability, since you will be seeing some flops, and you want to be able to flop some hands that can win at showdown. Observation is once again key, and will help you identify what are the best spots to go for a steal. Building on stealing, you want to focus your steal attempts to the late position seats. That means the hijack, the cutoff, and the button. Even if everyone is playing 10% of their hands, and we open from first position, with 9 players to get through, odds are someone will pick up something that they want to play. However, if it's folded to us in the small blind and we raise, we only have to get through one hand, and odds are the big blind doesn't have one. Following this little law of numbers, it should be fairly obvious why you want to do your stealing in late position. Fewer players to go through means a much lower likelihood of us running into a hand and getting played back at. Sometimes you will run into opponents who are aware of this idea that late position is good for stealing, and you'll find yourself getting played back at a lot. In these cases, we have to flip the system and start stealing from early position, because our opponents will be much more likely to believe that we have a real hand and give our opens respect. Generally, the lower the buy-in, the more we can stick to late position steals, and as the buy-ins get higher, players get more knowledgeable, and we must therefore adjust. Once again, remember the first goal. If you pay attention, you will see if late position opens are getting played back at or not, and you can adjust your stealing accordingly. Now that I've outlined your goals for the middle stages of a tournament, let's get a little more in depth on how to build up a stack. You want to know, you know who to steal from, you know where to steal from. Now let's look at some math for why you want to be stealing. With antes in play, there's an extra 0.5 to 1 big blinds in the middle to go after every hand. The beauty of antes, unlike blinds, is that nobody feels that they need to defend their antes, so they're much easier to pick up. Stacks become shallower as the tournament progresses, and to balance with this, we want to lower the size of our open raises. While in the early stages, an open of 3 times the big blind is proper, once the average stack drops to 40 big blinds or lower, you will want to be making your opens 2.5 times the big blind. Your opponents will probably fold the same hands for 2.5 big blinds that they would have folded for 3 big blinds, but you lower your investment for the times when they wake up with a hand and re-raise you. For simplicity, let's say the antes add up to 1 big blind. You will be risking 2.5 big blinds to steal 2.5 big blinds. This means that if you're pulling off a steal 50% of the time, you're breaking even. Anything above 50%, and you are making an instant profit without even seeing a flop. Let's look at some examples of blind stealing. If it's folded to us in the small blind, and our opponent is defending a typical tight range, we will be successful 90% of the time, much higher than the 50% break-even requirement. Even if our opponent is playing on the looser side and defending the top 25% of hands, our steal attempts will still show a profit over the long run. That's why, unless your opponent has shown an ability to play back or defend and make life hard for you post-flop, you should pretty much attempt to steal every time this situation presents itself. Moving to the button, now instead of one hand to get through, we have two hands to get through. If our opponents are only playing the top 10% of hands, our steal attempt from the button should be successful around 81% of the time. If they are defending the top 20%, we will be successful 64% of the time. Still, much higher than the break-even requirement of 50%. As long as you stick to the late positions and don't get out of line, meaning overdoing the play so your opponents clue in, your steal attempts should show a profit. And remember, if you steal once per round, you're keeping pace with the blinds, and if you're making 2 successful steals per round, you'll be chipping up steadily without incurring much variance. Hypothetically, if you were able to steal 2 pots per round and never get into any confrontations, you'd be able to make the final table. It should be clear that stealing is a very necessary strategy to being successful in tournaments. If you aren't stealing, you're going to get blinded off and end up with no chips. As the blinds go up and our stacks get shallow, we simply can't afford to wait for big hands anymore. Some of your opponents are aware of this, and they will be attempting to steal the blinds as well. To capitalize on the fact that our opponents are opening pots without premium holdings, we need to be re-raising or re-stealing from them. Taking a typical opening range of any suited Broadway, suited aces, ace-8 and better, ace-jack and up, king-queen and up, suited connectors, 5-deuce suited and up, and any pair, we have 15% of hands. If we are facing a re-raise, we would probably only want to continue with the premiums. We'll say ace-king and pocket tens are better. That's only 3.5% of hands. Even if we expand the defending range to include 7s, 8s, 9s, and ace-queen, now we're looking at 6% of hands. Why are these numbers important, you ask? Well, if our opponents are opening 15% of hands for 2.5 big blinds, there are now 5 big blinds in the middle. If we want to re-steal, we would re-raise to around 7 big blinds. So now we're risking 7 big blinds to win 5 big blinds. Our success rate is based on how often our opponent is folding. If our opponent is defending the tight range, he will be folding 11.5% of the 15% of hands he opened, which is about 76% of the time. If he is defending the looser range of 6%, he's still going to be folding to our re-raise about 60% of the time. So we're risking 7 to win 5, which means to break even we must be successful 58.3% of the time. And you can see from the example that I just discussed that even when our opponents are opening a reasonably tight range and calling the re-raise pretty liberally, we're already showing a profit. Now just imagine how often we'd be successful if our opponent was opening with tons of trash hands that he can't even think twice about defending with. This is why re-stealing is such a profitable play and should be something in your arsenal. If you notice someone who is getting really out of line with blind stealing, be willing to go for a re-raise. It's another great way to chip up without a showdown. In a tournament, you aren't going to get a ton of premium hands. So when you do get them, you want to maximize your payoff in the hand. Once stacks get shallow, there's no need to re-raise with big pairs since there are only a couple of bets left. If you're up against an aggressive opponent and both of you have 3 big blinds, the best play, or 30 big blinds, my apologies. The best play is to often just call their open pre-flop and call down their bets. You'll still be able to get all in, and you will maximize value from bluffs, which would have been forced to fold if you had raised. When deciding whether to flat call and open, you want to have a hand that dominates most of your opponent's range. If your opponent only opens with ace-jack and better and king-queen, then ace-queen becomes a perfect candidate to flat call with. If you re-raise, he will probably fold the hands you beat, meaning ace-jack and king-queen, and he will only continue with ace-king. But if you just flat call and you manage to hit top pair, You can expect to get a lot of value from your hand because you're going to have him dominated very often, and there's no reason an aggressive opponent should slow down when he flops top pair. If your opponent is opening with any Broadway, now ace jack and king queen also become good hands to flat call with for the same reasons as before. Your calling range should be dependent on how loose your opponent is opening, and against the total nits, you pretty much only want to flat call with aces. If you're playing 30 big blinds or less and manage to make top pair after calling a preflop open, you shouldn't ever be thinking about folding the hand. The reason you made the call preflop is because you figured to have the best hand, and once you flop top pair, you've got to assume that it's still the best hand. Your thinking should be whether you need to just call down and keep his bluffs in, or if you need to raise to protect your hand against draws. The same holds true when you have an overpair. If you have a good feel for your opponent's range, then you should be looking to play the hand for stacks and determine the best plan of action to get all the money in. If you still have a deep stack of 40 big blinds or more later in the tournament, you're still allowed to call opens with pocket pairs and suited connectors, just like in the early stages of the tournament. It's important, however, to realize that just because you have 40 big blinds doesn't mean you can win 40 big blinds on a hand. If the player who opens only has 10 big blinds in his stack, then you effectively have 10 big blinds as well, since that's the most you can win or lose in this particular hand against them. So before you try to speculate with a high implied odds hand, make sure that both you and your opponent have at least 40 big blinds. Otherwise, you're going to want to be folding and looking for hands that can make top pair or an overpair. Since people are stealing with a lot of weak hands, there becomes some value to defending your blinds. You're getting better pot odds with the dead money in the pot once antes have kicked in, and most players will be opening for less than 3 big blinds, giving you a pretty good price on your call. The hands that we should flat from the blinds are once again based on how loose our opponent is opening. We want to be calling with hands that can make top pair, or in the case where we are very deep stacked, hands that can make sets, straights, and flushes. We still don't, however, need to be defending with hands like 7-8 offsuit and Jack-3 suited. You're looking to avoid reverse implied odds situations and be calling with hands that dominates your opponent's opening range. Sometimes the cards don't matter. If you have an opponent who raises every single time it's folded to him on the button, odds are he doesn't have a hand that can stand a re-raise. Against players who you know are capable of stealing and having getting out of line, it's good to mix in a re-steal from the big blind. What's great about re-stealing from the big blind is that once again, you only have to get through one hand to win the pot, the hand of the opener. When you re-steal from other positions, there are often still players left tack behind you, more hands to worry about, because you never know when someone's going to wake up with something. If you're going to re-steal, look at the position of the opener to determine if it's likely he's stealing or if he's just likely to have a real hand. Next, look at whether or not you have any blockers to big hands. These would be aces, kings, queens, or jacks. If you have an ace, it's 50% less likely that your opponent has an ace in his hand, and thus less likely he has a good enough hand to call your re-raise. Blockers aren't the be-all and end-all when it comes to picking spots to re-steal, but they definitely add to your overall success rate. Lastly, think about your image. Have you been re-stealing a lot? If so, maybe you should pass up on this opportunity. If you've been playing very tight, your opponents are more likely to believe you have a real hand when you re-raise, and you should lean more towards trying to 3-bet rather than folding and waiting for a better spot. Now you know all the moves to build a big stack. They are all profitable and can help you make your way to the final table. The key is to not overdo it. Just like you should be paying attention to your opponents, chances are some of them are going to be paying attention to you as well. If you've been stealing a lot, there's a good chance you'll be getting re-raised soon. If you've been re-stealing a lot, you're probably going to be getting called or re-raised by some surprisingly weak holdings. You want your opponents to think you're playing tight when you go for these plays, and after you've been successful a few times, you need to do some folding so that your opponents forget about you. Most of your players will be focused on the short term, i.e. what happened in the last 10 hands rather than the long term. So try not to ever raise 3 pots per round, more than 3 pots per round, and you should be able to fly under the radar. There are some exceptions, of course, to this rule. If nobody at your table has shown an ability to play back without a real hand, then you want to be opening a ton of pots. Likewise, if you're the big stack and your opponents are relatively short, you want to keep the pressure on. When you have your table covered, you can hurt your opponents a lot, but they can't really hurt you. Anytime you find yourself in this situation, you want to be hammering and picking up as much dead money as possible to help you build your stack. But as soon as people start to get sick of you, it's time to take a break and give them a chance to forget about all the robbery you've been getting away with. If you're at a strong table, you want to mainly play your hands. The more skilled your opponents are, the less likely they are. The more skilled your opponents are, the more likely they are to catch you with your hand in the cookie jar. If you find yourself with a rough table draw, play your hands and protect your stack. There are tons of tables in these things, and you shouldn't have to wait long before your table gets broken. If you're at a weak table, you don't really need to worry about your cards and should focus on the profitable spots. Your opponents are going to be playing their cards, and you too should be playing their cards rather than your own. Also, if you have been very card dead and thus have a tight image, now is another time to play your spots and not worry about your actual holdings. In the middle stages of the tournament, you should be willing to take some gambles in the hopes of building a big stack. The tougher your table, the more you should be willing to take coin flips, since you won't have a big skill advantage. Also, at a tough table, if you are able to become the big stack, you can put a lot of pressure on your opponents due to the fear that they'll have that you can bust them. At a weaker table, you don't need to be the big stack to apply pressure, since your opponents will only be thinking about one thing: their cards. At these types of tables, it's very easy to steal blinds and pick up chips without showdown. When you can find lots of spots to pick up easy, low variance chips, you don't need to be taking coin flips. Use your skill when you receive a good table draw and take as much luck out of the game as possible. Now, let's look at playing the bubble, also known as the most profitable period of the tournament. You've probably seen it before or thought about it yourself. The bubble's getting close. You only have to outlast 2 more people to get double your investment on the tournament. You've already been playing for 4 hours, so why would you want to throw it away now? No way. You're only going to get your money in with the nuts of super nuts because you can wait till you cash to loosen up and gamble. This is an extremely common type of thinking for recreational players who play tournaments, and it is what makes the bubble so damn profitable. Where players were defending with the top 20% of hands before, now you will see people who will only play the top 3% of hands because they want to stay out of trouble. People just don't want to go broke or do any gambling on the bubble, so your fold equity is extremely high at this point of the game. If you're the big stack, you pretty much want to raise every single hand. It doesn't matter if your opponents know you're getting out of line, they don't want to mess with the guy who can bust them out of the tournament, so you pretty much have free reign. If you think someone else is trying to steal on the bubble, re-raise them. You can bust them, but they can't bust you, so you might as well put the pressure on. After all, you're the big stack. Now, don't feel like it's your job to bust anyone. If you're the big stack, you want to keep the bubble going as long as possible, so you can pick up free chips. Once the bubble bursts, players will loosen up and be much more willing to defend their blinds and call re-raises. If you find a good spot to call someone's all-in, where you have the best hand, or by pot odds, by all means take it, but don't go out of your way to bust someone just to end the bubble. This is your time to shine. Embrace it. If you're a medium stack, you want to attack the small stacks and avoid the big stacks. You don't want to go overboard because the big stacks can push you around, but if it doesn't seem like anyone else is taking advantage of the bubble, feel free to take your shot. Remember, if you only need to win 50% of the time on your steals, and people are folding more than that, you might as well take advantage. If someone else is taking advantage of the bubble, that's alright. Just stay out of their way. If you pick up a reasonable hand to re-raise, then you should lean on them a little, since they won't often have a hand that can take much action. But if nothing presents itself, folding through is fine, since you'll have a playable stack once you make it to the money. As a short stack, you want to be playing for the win. People aren't going to be calling you late on the bubble, so there will be much more profitable opportunities to move in, pick up the blinds and antes. The bubble is your best chance to steal your way back to a medium stack, but you can't be afraid to go out. Look for players who are playing super tight and make your move on them. Sometimes they'll wake up with a big pair, but even when they do, you'll still have at least a 20% chance to double up, and often you'll be looking at 40% if you have live cards against their ace-king or ace-queen. Likewise, if you have a big enough stack that you can re-raise all in and have fold equity, look for players who are abusing the bubble and make your move on them. As I said before, the goal is to keep the bubble going, not to end it. And that, combined with the fact that they will be opening with any two cards, makes for one of the most profitable re-stealing opportunities in tournament poker. If no good spots come up, that's okay. Just because it's the bubble doesn't mean you have to make moves. It's perfectly fine to fold your way into the money as long as you'll still have a reasonable stack with some fold equity once that bubble bursts. You're already so short stacked, and you need so much luck to get back in the game when you're a micro stack, since nobody will fold if you move all in. In this case, you want to keep an eye on the lobby and see if there are other players who are as short stacked as you are. If there are other desperate people, then you should wait it out and hope that someone else fails to wait it out and goes out before you. If, however, the next smallest stack is like 6 big blinds and it's 5 players from the money and you have like 1.5 big blinds, then you're going to have to pick a hand like an ace, a pair, or any two broadways and just hope that it can win a race and get you back in the game. The middle stages of a tournament are the most grueling for sure. You have to play a lot of hands without any guaranteed payday, and all it takes is one bad beat for all your hard work to go to waste. A lot of people think that all you can do is get it in with the best of it, and if you get unlucky, then that's life, and it's true. But if you can find good spots to chip up and pick up pots that nobody else wants, there's a good chance that when you do take that bad beat, you'll have more than enough chips to withstand it, more chips than your opponent, and you'll still have chips left after the hand, and thus still a chance to win the tournament. So by picking good spots to pick up chips, you're effectively giving yourself a free second chance. Pick your spots, and always keep in mind how the table perceives you. Sometimes it's worth passing up a good spot so that your opponents know you don't try to steal every time you can. If you pay attention to your table, you shouldn't have too much difficulty identifying where your chips will come from throughout the tournament. Take advantage when you have the chance, and you'll be going into the money with a very good shot at taking down the title. This has been Evan Jarvis for Tower Gaming. See you at the top.